When you find yourself waking up at 3 a.m., it's not always restlessness, stress, or a random disturbance. Sometimes it's a divine interruption. God tapping you on the shoulder in the quietest hour of the night, because He knows that's the only moment when your heart is still enough to hear Him. At 3 a.m., the noise of the world is silenced. The demands of the day are behind you, and your spirit is wide open. In that sacred moment, God isn't calling you to worry. He's calling you to warfare, to alignment, to a conversation that could shift the entire direction of your life. I remember a night when I woke up exactly at that time, eyes suddenly wide open, heart beating, mind strangely alert. And in that moment, instead of reaching for my phone or trying to force myself back to sleep, I felt an unmistakable pull. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was a nudge that whispered, "Get up. Something needs to be addressed." And when I knelt down, it wasn't long before I realized God wasn't wakening me to burden me. He was wakening me to prepare me, to protect me, to speak into something I didn't even know was forming in the spiritual realm. You see, the enemy works in the dark, but God calls His children to rise in the dark so they can interrupt the enemy's plans before the sun ever rises. That 3 a.m. pull is not punishment. It's positioning. It is God telling you, before this day begins, before the enemy makes his move, before life tries to overwhelm you, come talk to me first. Because when God wakes you up, He's not trying to disrupt your sleep. He's trying to establish your victory. And if you learn to respond to that whisper, you'll begin to see breakthrough show up in places that have been stuck for years. There's a reason the Bible often speaks about God moving in the watches of the night. Because when everything around you is still, heaven is busy. At 3 a.m., while the world sleeps, spiritual activity is at its peak. Battles are being fought. Assignments are being released. Protection is being placed over God's people. And when you wake up in that hour, you're not waking up alone. You're waking up into a moment that has already been stirred by the presence of God. Sometimes God wakes you up, not because something is wrong, but because something is right. Something is ready. Something is about to shift. You might think it's coincidence, but God doesn't deal in coincidence. He deals in divine timing. And when He pulls you awake, it's because He is inviting you into something bigger than yourself. He wants to show you what your eyes could not see during the day. He wants to whisper what your mind was too busy to understand. He wants to strengthen you before the weight of tomorrow even arrives. It's in that quiet hour that God reveals things that were hidden, confronts things that were hurting you, and heals things you didn't even know were broken. At 3 a.m., the distractions slip away, and your spirit becomes sensitive, more open, more honest, more available. That's why your prayers hit different at that hour. That's why your tears fall faster. Your words flow clearer. Your heart opens wider. Because God doesn't just wake you up to pray. He wakes you up so he can meet you, fill you, and prepare you. And if you pay attention, you'll notice every time God wakes you at that hour, something in your life is either about to be confronted or about to be elevated. He's calling you into partnership with him, inviting you to step into his strategy and positioning you to experience breakthroughs that can only be birthed in the stillness of the night. When you wake up at 3 a.m. and that heaviness sits on your chest, or that sudden wave of worry tries to creep in, that's not the moment to panic. That's the moment to pray. Because what the enemy wants you to believe is that something is attacking you. But what God wants you to understand is that something is awakening in you. And prayer in that hour carries a weight, an authority, a fire that daytime prayers don't always carry. Not because God is different at night, but because you are different at night. You're quieter, you're humbler, you're more dependent, more surrendered, more willing to listen. At 3 a.m., your soul isn't fighting to impress anyone. You're not performing. You're not pretending. You're not covering up the parts of you that hurt. You're raw before God, and that rawness is honesty. And honesty is where breakthroughs begin. Heaven leans in closer when you pray from the heart. And there is something about midnight hours that pull the truth out of you. That's why spiritual battles feel stronger at night, because your spirit is more open to what God is trying to do in you. When you pray in that hour, you're not just whispering words. You're pushing back darkness. You're declaring peace into places where fear tried to settle. You're inviting God into the rooms of your heart where you don't normally let anyone enter. And every word you speak becomes a seed planted in the soil of the unseen. You may not feel something immediately, but heaven moves the moment your knees touch the floor. Sometimes the enemy wakes you to trouble you, but God allows it so you can trouble the enemy back. Sometimes anxiety shakes you awake, but God turns it into an altar. Sometimes restlessness tries to rob you, but God transforms it into revelation. So when you pray at 3 a.m., you're not praying into the darkness. You're praying through it. You're praying until the weight lifts, until clarity comes, until that peace that makes no sense wraps itself around you like a blanket. You don't have to shout. You don't have to be eloquent. You just have to be present, because God hears even the trembling whisper of a 3 a.m. prayer. And while the world sleeps, heaven listens. There's something powerful that happens when a believer chooses to pray. In the hour, they were tempted to worry. When you rise at 3 a.m., you're not just waking up. You're stepping into a sacred moment, a battlefield where heaven has already positioned angels on assignment. You may feel tired, weak, or confused about why you're awake, but God is not confused. He is intentional. And in that hour, He is drawing you because He wants to shift the atmosphere around you. At 3 a.m., the world is silent, but the spiritual realm is not. That's the moment when your prayer becomes a weapon sharper than any fear that tried to shake you. You begin to speak life into places that once felt empty. You declare God's promises over situations that looked impossible in the daylight. Suddenly, words you didn't even plan start flowing from your spirit. Words of authority, words of faith, words of strength. And your room becomes a sanctuary, a war room where God meets you in the quiet and fights battles you didn't even see coming. Sometimes, when you pray at that hour, you feel a peace wash over you so deeply that you know it didn't come from this world. Other times, you feel something break, like a chain snapping off your heart or a weight lifting off your mind. And then there are moments when nothing feels different at all, but something still moved, because prayer isn't about emotion. It's about alignment. When you pray at 3 a.m., you align your spirit with heaven. You align your thoughts with God's truth. You align your life with His direction. And while you pray, God begins to whisper things you couldn't hear during the rush of your day. He reveals the person you need to forgive. He brings clarity to a decision you've been wrestling with. He reminds you that He's been holding you all along. He gives you strength that shows up in the morning like a fresh wind in your chest. And whether the prayer lasts 5 minutes or 50, it plants something deep within you. A courage, a light, a resilience that carries you through the next day. In that quiet, holy hour, heaven isn't far. It's close. And your prayer becomes the bridge between your human weakness and God's supernatural strength. When you rise at 3 a.m. and choose to pray instead of panic, something incredible begins to happen inside you. You start to shift from surviving to overcoming. You stop looking at the night as an enemy and start recognizing it as an opportunity. You begin to understand that God doesn't wake warriors to be weakened. He wakes warriors to be strengthened, to be sharpened, to be prepared for what's ahead. And sometimes the most powerful preparation comes in the hours nobody else sees. Because while others are asleep, God is building something in you: patience, discernment, spiritual muscle, clarity. He's molding your character in the dark so you can stand confidently in the light. And every time you choose prayer over fear, worship over worry, and faith over frustration, you are training your spirit to trust God on a deeper level. You are learning how to walk with Him, not just when it's comfortable, but when it's quiet, uncertain, and stretching. There are things God can only release when you are still enough to receive them. And at 3 a.m., when your heart is open and your guard is down, that's when He pours wisdom into you like oil. That's when He speaks direction that cuts through confusion. That's when He strengthens you for an assignment you haven't even stepped into yet. You think God is waking you to pray about what's worrying you, but sometimes He's waking you to prepare you for a blessing you're not yet ready to carry. And as you keep showing up in those early hours, something beautiful begins to take root. Your spirit grows steadier. Your mind grows clearer. Your heart grows braver. You begin to walk through your days with a quiet confidence that doesn't come from your own strength, but from the strength God deposited in you when the world was silent. You start to notice that problems no longer shake you the way they used to, because you've learned how to fight from a place of authority, not panic. You've learned that you're not waking up at 3 a.m. to face darkness. You're waking up to bring light. And the more you pray in the dark, the more power you carry in the daylight. What you need to understand is that every 3 a.m. awakening, every whisper of prayer, every moment you chose to trust instead of tremble, none of it is wasted. Heaven records it. God honors it. Your spirit grows because of it. And over time, you begin to realize that you were never waking up into a random moment. You were waking up into an invitation to come closer, an invitation to grow deeper, an invitation to rise higher than the fear that tried to grip you. At first, it feels like interruption, but eventually it becomes intimacy. You start to recognize the presence of God not as a distant echo, but as a familiar friend meeting you in the quiet. And the more you lean into these moments, the more sensitive your spirit becomes. You begin to discern things you used to overlook. You begin to sense when God is moving, even before anything changes on the outside. You begin to see life, not just with your eyes, but with your spirit, understanding that God is shaping you with precision, calling you into a greater version of yourself that only grows through these sacred encounters. The things that once overwhelmed, you begin to lose their grip because you've learned how to take them straight to God before they ever settle in your heart. Soon, waking up isn't a burden, it's a blessing. It's the moment where your courage is restored, your peace is renewed, and your strength is rebuilt. It's where you receive the kind of clarity that lights up your entire day. God begins to reveal why He woke you, why He drew you near, why He chose you for this hour. And you discover that this awakening isn't just about solving your problems. It's about transforming your posture. It's about raising your spiritual awareness, sharpening your faith, and putting you in position for breakthrough. Because the more consistent you become in the night, the more confident you become in the day. You walk into rooms with a different kind of authority. You face challenges with a different kind of calm. You respond to chaos with a different kind of confidence. Not because life got easier, but because your connection to God grew stronger. That's what 3 a.m. prayer does. It builds a foundation that storms cannot shake. It turns you into someone who doesn't just react to the world, but someone who changes the atmosphere around them. And before you know it, you start to see evidence of every prayer you thought was small, every whisper you thought went unnoticed. God begins opening doors, shifting situations, healing wounds, restoring joy, and strengthening your steps. And you realize this wasn't just a prayer routine. This was God training your spirit, elevating your awareness, and preparing you for blessings that require a heart anchored in Him.